This is Ugravidity by Dr. Emmit Brown, read to you by the author. Summary: Gravid, adjective, pregnant. Ugravidity, pun, Uravity is pregnant. Ochako and Bakugo have been married for a couple of years, and now they're getting ready to have their first child, sequel to Making Babies. Please note this fic is rated T for teen, however the prequel Making Babies is rated explicit. Author's note: this fic holds a very special place in my heart. I wrote it when my wife was pregnant with our second child, my daughter. The idea for the fic came from all the memories of our son's arrival a few years earlier, and I put a lot of those stories into this one. I'm releasing this podfic on January 20th because it is my daughter's first birthday. I hope you all enjoy. Bakugo Katsuki opened his eyes and looked over at the alarm clock on the nightstand but next to his bed. The red numbers blazed the time at him, 4:59 a.m. While he was already an early riser, waking up before your alarm is never fun, even if it was only by a few minutes. He switched off the alarm function before it could go off and rolled over to cuddle his wife. She insisted that the clock radio be tuned to the station that had their old teacher, President Mike's morning show. Personally, he always found the man grating, and hated waking up to his loud voice coming through the speakers. He had to admit, though, the quirk-enhanced voice did wake him up in the morning. It was Friday, and he had to work at 8 o'clock that day. Thankfully, only an 8-hour desk duty shift. Then he'd have the whole weekend off, a luxury for most heroes. Someone in scheduling was going to get a bottle of sake and thanks. With any luck, he wouldn't get called in on an emergency, and would be able to relax. Maybe they'd be able to work on that other project they'd started this month, too. He felt his wife begin to stir against him, and felt himself rise to the occasion. "Oi, Cheeks, time to wake up," he said softly. A groan was his reply, as a tangled tuft of brown hair emerged from under the covers. Ochako turned over and latched onto him, nuzzling into his chest, as she drifted off again. He should have let the alarm go off. "Oi," he said a little louder. "We need to go on our run. You can sleep this weekend." When they found out Katsuki was going to have the weekend off, Ochako had gone into work and demanded the same from her boss, Deku. It helped that she was his best friend. It helped more that she was also friendly with his wife. Too tired," came the response from somewhere buried in his chest. "I had a late shift last night, remember?" She'd gotten in at 11 o'clock and then stayed up past midnight doing paperwork. "I don't need to go until noon." Katsuki rolled his eyes. "You told me you wanted to go with me on my run." "Next time." Katsuki sighed at his wife. "Well, if you don't want to go for a run," he said as he adjusted his grip, moving his hand down to cup her ass, "want to try for that baby?" He still couldn't believe it sometimes that he ended up with Ochako. He'd had a bit of a crush on her since their first year at UA, but she'd always had eyes for Deku, until one day when he found her drowning her sorrows in the bar with her froggy friend. Turns out his rival had knocked up some other girl from UA 3 times and married her while everyone else in class was focusing on their careers. Ochako had found out when she came to his hero agency looking for a job. She'd gotten the job, and her heart broken. He hadn't intended to swoop in as a rebound, but that's how it started. His eternally burning rivalry with Midoriya seemed to be just what she needed right then. They drank and cursed his name all night, shared a taxi back to his place, where she immediately passed out on the couch, and he ended up unconscious with his head in the toilet. Ochako had always said the anti-hangover waffles he made for her in the morning is when she realized she was interested in dating him. That was 2 years ago. Their relationship had been a whirlwind, but it was the best thing to ever happen to him. They'd gotten married a year ago, and just recently decided to start trying for a baby. Ochako was practically a co-owner in Midoriya's hero agency, and Katsuki had just gotten a promotion at Endeavors, so they figured it was as good a time as any to expand their little family. Unfortunately, the life of a hero was one fraught with danger, long shifts, late nights, and not a lot of time with one significant other. Since Ochako had stopped taking birth control, they'd only been able to have sex twice due to their busy schedules. At this rate, Deku and his wife would have a whole baseball team of kids before they even had one. Katsuki had no idea how his rival found the time. Hopefully this weekend together would prove fruitful. He massaged her flanks through her pajama pants and earned a small moan of approval for his efforts. Her hands traveled down his back, grabbing his firm ass, encouraging him to do more. He slipped a hand under her top, stroking the muscles on her back. The moan got louder. He rolled them both over, settling between her legs, and dropped a blistering kiss on her lips from above, which she returned enthusiastically. The hand under her shirt migrated to grasp at her breast. Ochako gasped at the touch, but something was off. That wasn't a sexy gasp. It was a painful one. She roughly pushed him away. Ow! You need to be more gentle. Kacchako blinked at her. The fuck you talking about, Cheeks? I was being gentle. I know you need to work up to more rough shit. Well, it hurt like hell, she whined, massaging her chest. Gods, both of them were sore now. Way to kill the mood. Kacchako was confused, upset at being chastised, and more than a little bit horny. He grumbled under his breath, roughly throwing the blanket aside as he stomped to the bathroom. His hands crackled as he tried to keep his temper in check. Kacchako returned from his run feeling slightly better, if still annoyed he'd had to take care of himself in the shower. He was carrying a drink carrier from the coffee shop down the street, 2 cups in the holes, and a brown paper bag balanced on top. Cheeks! Breakfast! He called. Ochako emerged from the bedroom a couple minutes later, dragging her feet as she made her way to their small dining table. She immediately dropped her head onto her arms upon sitting down. Kacchako rolled his eyes. Come on, I'll let you sleep another hour. You have to wake up sometime. Her only response was a grunt from inside her folded arms. He put her coffee in front of her and pulled a donut from the bag. Light roast, 2 pumps of caramel, 3 sugars, and a chocolate donut, he said. A hand slithered out from under her head to retrieve the donut, like a tentacle dragging a morsel to the mouth of a kraken. And then the donut reappeared, rolling across the table as it was rejected by the beast. Ugh, there's something wrong with that. She sat up and took a swig of her coffee, and nearly spit it out. That, too. It's disgusting. For the second time that morning, Kacchako stared at Ochako as if she'd sprouted another head. He sniffed the donut, then the coffee. They don't smell bad. The only thing wrong is the fucking 5 kilos of sugar in it. That's your usual order. Nope, tastes like death. Get rid of it. She walked into the kitchen to get herself a glass of water to wash the taste out of her mouth. Kacchako followed behind, carrying his own coffee. He removed the lid and took a sip. Ochako perked up suddenly as the scent of black brew wafted over her. Oh, wow, she said, staring hungrily at the cup. That smells amazing. What is it? Kacchako blinked at her. My usual, Spanish roast, black. Can I have some? Asked Ochako, her eyes shining. You hate black coffee, he reminded her, and you hate dark roasts. It's too bitter. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, she said, as she took his cup from his grasp, ignoring the cries of protest from her husband. Holding it between both her hands, she took a deep sniff, and then let out a satisfied sigh. Then she took a little sip, and another, then a long draught. Kacchako stared at his wife as she downed the entire coffee in one go. He turned on his heel and walked into the bathroom without a word. He returned a few minutes later, holding a small box. Ochako didn't notice his approach. She was busy trying to knock the last few drops into the cup into her mouth by patting on the bottom. Finally satisfied she got the last of it, she sheepishly looked at her husband, but the apology died on her lips as she noticed what he was carrying. What's that for? She asked. Go piss on this, he said roughly, handing her the pregnancy test. Ochako took it, but looked at him incredulously. Seriously? I'm not pregnant. I haven't missed my period yet. Your taste buds are all out of whack, and your tits hurt, he responded. Those are early symptoms of pregnancy. You went off your birth control last month, and we've had sex this cycle. Now it was Ochako's turn to be confused. How the hell do you know so much about early pregnancy? She smirked at him. Did you get someone else pregnant before we got together and didn't tell me? Is it Mina? I think I could live with it if it were Mina. When do I get to meet your kid? He rolled his eyes at her. I read up on it when we started trying. I wanted to know what to look for and how to take care of your pregnant ass. He blushed slightly. His eyes refused to meet hers. Ochako smiled widely at his admission. She wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a deep kiss. Thank you, she said, her eyes shining. She looked at the box. I seriously doubt I'm pregnant, though. Most couples take a few months before they get a positive test. Longer if there's a problem. Just go piss on the damn stick, he replied, his patience running thin with his stubborn wife. 15 minutes later, she emerged from the bathroom holding the stick. Her face was pale and she looked nervous. Kacchako felt his heart begin to pound in his chest, and his throat dry up. What? What is it? He asked. It's... She couldn't say it. She handed him the test. Kacchako was having a hard time breathing. He looked at the window on the test, glad he'd sprung for the test with the digital readout. There would be no question that she was... not pregnant. Ochako snorted as she tried to hold back her laughter. Her shoulders were shaking with the effort. Kacchako gritted his teeth. Yeah, laugh it up, Space Cadet. He stomped toward the bathroom to throw the test away. Oh, come on, Kacchako. You have to admit it's at least a little funny. She followed him into the bathroom, only to find him reading the instructions on the back of the box. I know how to pee on a stick, Kacchako. You don't need to read the instructions, she huffed. annoyed that he seemed to believe she took the test wrong. They make these things idiot-proof, you know. He turned the box around to show her what he was reading. It says here you need to be closer to your period for it to work. You'll have to take another one next week. She mimicked his go-to expression to show her derision. She smiled as his eyes widened and narrowed. He'd always got his ire up when she did that. You just don't want to be wrong. I'm telling you I'm not pregnant. I think I would know if I was. Kacchako rolled his eyes but said nothing. He knew he was right about this. It was only a matter of time. Oh my gods, May, this is delicious, said Ochako, a hand on her cheek and a look of absolute bliss as she grabbed another hors d'oeuvre from the platter. Thanks, but they came from the freezer section at the grocery store, replied the mechanic with a chuckle. The Midoriyas and the Bakugos were enjoying a quiet night together on the rooftop patio of the building that doubled as the headquarters for the Deku Hero Agency and the home of the Midoriya family. Ochako and May were sitting at the table snacking and chatting, while Izuku manned the grill. Ochako looked over at her husband, who was staring out over the city, nursing a beer, and ignoring everything going on around him. He and Izuku may have buried the hatchet back in high school, but he was still overly stubborn when it came to being friendly with his rival. Ochako shook her head and turned to look at May, who was once again heavily pregnant. The Midoriyas already had 3 kids and didn't seem like they were going to slow down anytime soon. May was sitting in a high-backed chair with a pillow for lumbar support and her feet up on an ottoman. She was about 7 months along now. One hand rested on her protruding belly. Ochako felt a small twinge of jealousy mixed with apprehension. She wondered what it would be like when she was that big, and if she'd ever get the chance. May caught her staring. So when are you guys going to have one? She asked mischievously. Ochako blushed. Actually, we started trying for one this month. Well, I say that, but it's been hard to find the time to... You know. If she blushed any harder, she'd probably pass out from too much blood flow to her cheeks, not enough to her brain. Talking about sex with her girlfriends was usually something she preferred to do after a glass or 2 of wine. Have sex? May's mischievous smile widened when Ochako's face turned purple. You have to make the time, sweetie. Besides, baby-making sex is the best. Seriously, next time you do it, look him in the eyes and say, "Put a baby in me." He'll blow his top instantly. I'll bet you get a little thrill out of it, too. Ochako wasn't too sure about that, but she let it slide. So is this one going to be it, then? 4 kids sounds like it's a handful. May shrugged. It will be, but we'll manage. We have a nanny, so I can get my projects finished. Plus, Izuku is getting better at delegating, so he's able to spend more time at home. We make it work. Izuku says we should wait a while to see how we feel about another one when this one comes. I was actually asked by Ida and Aoyama to surrogate for them when I was done having my own kids. Might do that once the oven is free. Ochako's eyes widened. How does Deku feel about that? He loves the idea. Those guys are some of his closest friends in the UA days. She smiled wickedly. Plus, me being pregnant really turns him on. The sex is amazing. Ochako's blush returned with a vengeance. Suddenly, May winced, then smiled softly. He's moving around right now. Would you like to feel? Oh, may I? Ochako asked enthusiastically. May nodded and lifted her shirt. Ochako came around the table and knelt next to her friend. She placed a hand on May's Gravid stomach as May guided her to the right spot. She gasped in surprise when she felt something underneath the skin move and push against her hand. Oh, wow, she said softly. Yeah, it really feels weird on this side, but I love it, said May. It means everything is fine and the baby is healthy. She winced. At least until the baby kicks my bladder. Help me up? I need to go to the bathroom now. Ochako giggled and helped her friend stand. She watched as May waddled inside, smiling wistfully. Katsuki sighed contentedly as he stared blankly out over the cityscape. Despite the inauspicious beginnings of his day, it had been rather relaxing in the end. The paperwork, while mountainous, was not overly difficult. He was able to listen to some music and turn off his brain while he filled out the forms. Maybe he would volunteer for desk duty from time to time, if only to give himself a break. Getting off at 17 o'clock was pretty nice, too. He took another swig of his beer, letting the bitter taste wash over his tongue. He and Ochako should look into getting an apartment with a balcony. They were going to need to move to one with 2 bedrooms if they had a baby soon. Maybe a house? His moment of zen was interrupted by something grabbing at his leg. He looked down and saw a pink-haired toddler staring up at him, a pacifier in his mouth, and a look of curiosity on his face. He was clutching a little dynamite doll. "Tsk," said Katsuki, rolling his eyes. He gently picked up the child and carried it over to his father. Oi, Deku, you lost one. His tone carried heat, but he kept the volume down. Ah, Shoto, what are you doing out here? Asked Izuku as he took his youngest son from Katsuki. The boy held out his doll. Does Uncle Kachan look like dynamite? Katsuki turned his head to hide his blush. Inko, Toshinori, and Shoto? Why the fuck are all your kids named after people we know? Can't you two come up with unique names? Izuku laughed and bounced his son in his arms, drawing a giggle out of the boy. Well, May just wanted to call them actual baby numbers 1 through 4, so I had to figure out names on my own. He looked at his rival seriously. You know, we haven't named the one she's carrying right now. We'd like to name Katsuki. Katsuki glared at him. Or maybe we'll call him Tenya instead, he finished lamely. Come on, Shoto, let's get you back to the nursery and give you to Robo-Nanny. Maybe Mama needs to run a diagnostic on her if you were able to escape. He carried his son back inside. Ochako smiled at her husband as he approached. She offered him an hors d'oeuvre, but he refused with a wave of his hand. He sat down next to her on the bench seat, and she scooted over closer. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder. I saw you holding Shoto. You were very gentle. I didn't know you had it in you, she teased. The kid's only a year old. He hasn't earned my ire. Yet. Ochako gave his hand a squeeze. I think you're going to be a great dad, she said softly. She was rewarded with a blush across his cheeks, and he returned the squeeze. When Ochako wolfed down another hors d'oeuvre, Katsuki looked at her side-eyed. What the fuck are you eating, anyways? Ochako swallowed quickly to clear her mouth. I don't know. May said they got them in the freezer section at the grocery store. They got some kind of seafood in them. They're delicious. Katsuki grabbed one and smelled it. Takoyaki, he said. You fucking hate takoyaki. Ochako paused, another octopus ball halfway to her mouth. Is it? Yes. You told me on our third date at that summer festival that you hated takoyaki when I offered to get some. That even just the smell of it made you want to retch. Aw, you remember our third date? She smiled at him, before the smile turned wicked. Or do you remember it because of what we did after that festival? Flashes of those memories threatened to distract Katsuki from his point. He shoved an octopus ball into his mouth and chewed. Fuck, it's not even very good takoyaki, he grumbled around the mouthful. Izuku came back out on the roof holding 2 bottles in his hands. Anyone want wine? He asked. Ooh, me, said Ochako, raising her hand and bouncing in her seat. Katsuki grabbed her hand, dropping it. None for you. Ochako scowled at him. Why not? We don't have to work tomorrow. He returned the scowl and lowered his voice, speaking through gritted teeth. Because you're fucking pregnant. I'm not pregnant, she said, much louder than him. I took a test this morning, remember? Pregnant? May appeared behind her husband, having returned from the bathroom. Ochako didn't like the look on her face. It looked too much like the old May from high school whenever someone wandered into the development studio. A test subject had just walked into her lair. No, she said, holding her arms up. The test this morning was negative. I've not even missed a period yet. Her tits hurt and she's eating weird shit, Katsuki said, earning a punch on the shoulder. Don't believe her. May approached her with a critical eye, a hand stroking her chin as she stared at the other woman's body. She circled Ochako, coming up behind her. Then she reached under her arms and grabbed her breasts. Ochako gasped at the growth. Katsuki, who had been taking a drink from his beer, did a spit take. Well, your boobs are certainly a little bigger than they were before, she murmured, before grinning madly. Come on, we'll hook you up to baby number 600821, and we'll get a more concrete answer. She grabbed Ochako's arm and dragged her towards the door, like some kind of beast dragging its next victim into its lair. Hey, mate, what are you doing? Katsuki, help! Katsuki watched with interest as his wife disappeared into the doorway, wondering idly how often May groped Ochako since she instantly knew her cup size. He stood and followed the pair, leaving Izuku standing there, wondering if he should follow or stay and keep an eye on the food cooking on the grill. Ochako was placed in a chair in May's lab. Or rather, she was strapped into a chair in the lab. May then attached a sensor to her stomach just below her navel, another to her finger, and a third under her tongue. May then walked over to her drawer and pulled out something packed in plastic. As May tore the package open, Ochako couldn't help but think that the probe looked rather phallic. May, what's that for? The engineer seemed to remember Ochako was there and looked at her in surprise at the question. Don't worry, it's sterile, she chirped. It's a transvaginal probe so we can get an ultrasound of your womb. It's the only way to get a good picture this early on. It goes in your... No, none of that, thank you. She squeezed her legs tight before May could undo her pants. May shrugged and tossed the probe into a corner. That's fine. We can get enough data from the other probes. Last thing I need is a blood sample. Before Ochako could refuse again, May pricked the finger with a lancet and collected a drop of blood in a tube. She then walked back to her workbench, inserted the tube into a machine, plugged in the probes, attached to Ochako, and threw a switch. The lights dimmed as the machine drew power. Ochako worried when she heard the amount of noise the machine made. She worried even more when she saw the manic look in her friend's eyes as May rubbed her hands in anticipation and cackled to herself. Kacchako wandered into the room and looked around in bewilderment. He knew May wouldn't hurt his wife, at least not on purpose. He couldn't help but be more than a little concerned when the machine's hum became a high-pitched whine and it started to rattle like an off-balance washing machine. It was also causing some feedback in his hearing aids. Maybe he should have May look into shielding them better. He reached up and turned them down. Finally, the noise stopped as quickly as it had begun. A bell within the machine went ding, and a card was spat out of a slot on the top. May snatched it and read it critically, nodding and humming to herself. She handed the card to Kacchako. Kacchako took the card without a word. There was only one word printed on it. Pregnant! I knew it! He shouted, pumping a fist into the air. Later that evening, Kacchako was still looking rather pleased with himself, and was really starting to piss off Ochako. We're home now, she said as they were getting ready for bed. It's only me here. You don't have to look so smug about being right. Oh, I got over that at dinner, he replied as he took off his shirt. I just realized I knocked you up after only having sex twice. I have super swimmers. That just pissed her off even more. She crossed her arms and glared at him. Oh, so my fertility has nothing to do with it? Bakugo sensed he was on thin ice. Of course it does. You can brag about it if you want to. I just thought it would be weird if I did. Ochako rolled her eyes at him. I think you're forgetting the negative test this morning. You heard what the crazy mechanic said. She uses on herself, and it's never wrong. She's even gotten an accurate positive test before she was feeling symptoms. Ochako roughly pulled the blankets back and climbed into bed. She turned away from her husband and curled up with a humph. Kacchako rolled his eyes. All right, Cheeks, I'm sorry I gloated. He climbed into bed next to her and tried to put an arm around her waist, but she threw it off. Oi, what gives? He asked. Why the hell are you so happy? She asked quietly. Kacchako stared at the back of her head for a second, then noticed her shoulders were shaking as she cried quietly. He put his arm around her again, not letting her push it off, and pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. He threw one leg up over hers so that he was touching her entire length of her body. Okay, Cheeks, spill. What's wrong? She took a shuddering breath. I wasn't really expecting it to happen so fast, you know? I don't know. I have all these feelings, and you're just smug about your penis. Kacchako sighed and kissed the crown of her head. I'm sorry. I thought you'd be happy. We wanted this after all. I am happy, she countered, and scared because I'm going through a lot of changes, and angry that we didn't get to have a little more time to ourselves, and apprehensive about all the changes coming to our lives. Like, do I need to quit being a hero now? Not if you don't want to, he replied. We'll get May to build a nanny for us like theirs. Ochako laughed. Maybe we'll hire someone instead. That thing is creepy. Either way, we'll make it work. Ochako sighed and burrowed deeper into her husband's grasp. I'm going to get fat, she said, placing her hand on her currently flat stomach. Kacchiko's hand rested on top of hers, weaving their fingers together. No, you're going to get pregnant. Big difference. She chuckled. Still not going to fit in my hero costume. I guess I won't be wearing it for a while anyway. Better talk to Deku about going on desk duty for the next year. Damn nerd needed to hire someone else for anyway. You're already overworked. He gave her a squeeze. It's going to be okay. We're going to do this together. We'll make it work. Ochako choked back some tears and turned over to face her husband. I love you, she said. Love you too, Ochako, he replied. He dipped his head and they shared a long, passionate kiss. When they finally broke apart, Kacchako reached over and turned out the light. They fell asleep together in each other's arms. 8 weeks. All right, Bakugo-san, are you ready to see your baby? Asked the technician. Ochako grasped onto her husband's hand tightly as she nodded. They were at her first appointment, and Kacchako had insisted he was going to attend. The first part of the appointment had been an exam by her obstetrician. Sure, Kacchako had seen her naked from the waist down before, but it was still a little embarrassing to have him in the room while her doctor examined her mucus plug. The blush on his face betrayed the fact that even he found it a little uncomfortable. Then they were sent down the hall for their first ultrasound. There was the projector in the room, projecting the image from the ultrasound machine onto the wall so the couple could see. Ochako lifted her shirt, jumped when the cold gel was squirted on her stomach, then waited as the tech moved the wand around her abdomen. They both nodded at his question, and he hit a couple of keys in the machine. The picture changed slightly, and there it was, a little round dark area with a shadow inside. There's the head and the body. It's too small to see much else, but we'll get more pictures as you progress. We can also listen to the heartbeat. He clicked another button, and a rapid rhythmic sound came from the speakers. Ochako was glad she hadn't applied any makeup that morning because she could feel massive tears welling up and her nose starting to run. She looked over at Katsuki. He was staring slack-jawed at the screen, a look of wonder in his eyes. That just made the tears overflow. Katsuki looked back at Ochako to see her 2 seconds from full-on ugly crying. "What? What's wrong?" he asked, panicking a little. Ochako smiled and rubbed her eyes with the heel of her free hand. She smiled and squeezed the one in his grip. "Nothing. Everything is great." "Katsuki, you should really call your parents and let them know they're going to be grandparents," Ochako chastised. She'd just gotten off the phone with her own parents and told them the good news. Katsuki grumbled and paused his game, pulling out his phone. "Look, I'll text them the ultrasound picture. That should be plenty," he said, bargaining. Ochako rolled her eyes. "Okay, just don't say I didn't warn you. I'm going to go have a nap." She started for the bedroom. Katsuki grunted in acknowledgement. He pulled out the picture the ultrasound tech had sent him, attached it to a text message, and sent it to his mom and dad. Satisfied, he set his phone on the table in front of him and went back to his game. His phone buzzed a little insistently for a while, but it quit after 10 minutes. An hour later, just when he was about to take on the final boss, there was a knock on the door. Katsuki paused the game, grumbling at the interruption. He wasn't expecting anyone. Maybe Ochako ordered something online. He stood, stretching, before heading to the door to open it. He had just turned the handle when the door burst open, throwing him back into the apartment and banged against the wall. In stormed a beast who stomped across the floor, breathing fire. At least, that's how it looked to Katsuki. "You're having a baby and you can't even fucking call me?" screamed Mitsuki, her nose inches from her son's. A man walked in behind her. "Hi, Katsuki. Congrats on the baby," said Masaru. "Thanks, Dad," replied Katsuki without breaking eye contact with his mother. "Well, what do you have to say, old hag?" Mitsuki took a deep breath to scream at her son some more when the bedroom door opened, and Ochako emerged, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on out here? What's with the screaming?" The expression on Mitsuki's face changed instantly, as if a switch was thrown. "Ochako, my favorite daughter-in-law, how are you feeling? Congratulations!" She enveloped the pregnant woman in a massive hug, picking her up off her feet. "Thanks, Mitsuki, son," Ochako managed as her chest was being crushed. The older woman released her, and she stood there for a second, catching her breath. "Did Katsuki invite you over?" Mitsuki crossed her arms. "No, the little brat just sent us the ultrasound picture. No words, no phone call. Wouldn't even pick up the damn phone when we called him." Ochako turned to glare at her husband. He rolled his eyes at her in response. Mitsuki turned back to Ochako. "Now, how are you feeling, dear? I was sick as a dog with that brat." She led her daughter-in-law into the bedroom so they could chat. 10 weeks. Katsuki hated hospitals. He spent too much time inside them. This time, thankfully, he was a visitor, not a patient. May had gone into labor yesterday. Being her 4th child, the new addition to the Midoriya family came relatively quickly once labor started, as if he was impatient to escape the confines of his mother's womb. Ochako was excited to see her friend and meet the new arrival. At the same time, she was struggling to keep down her breakfast. She'd been miserable for the past few weeks. Various body parts were sore, she was nauseated all the time, and she was exhausted. The worst part, though, was her quirk was acting up. May had never said that being pregnant affected her quirk. Then again, hers was rather benign. Worst case scenario, she'd have to wear readers until her eyes worked themselves out. Ochako, on the other hand, found that being pregnant made her gassy. Whenever the gas tried to escape via one exit or the other, she tended to float slightly. The worst case was when a burp turned into hiccups in her sleep, and she ended up on the ceiling before Katsuki woke up and found her no longer in bed. He woke her up with his raucous laughter at her predicament. She was still peeved at him for that. They were buzzed in by security at the front of the maternity ward and led by a nurse to her friend's room. They knocked, and they were told by May to come in. Ochako teared up at the scene before her. Izuku was sitting in a recliner next to the hospital bed, texting people about the new arrival. May was sitting up in the bed, holding a bundle close to her chest, a look of absolute serenity on her face as she stared at her new baby. Ochako thought she looked angelic. May was also topless and was nursing her son, a fact that Ochako thought was beautiful and made her wistful for the future. Her husband, on the other hand... "Ah, shit! Why'd you tell us to come in when you had your tits out?" he said, turning around hastily and walking out the door again. May giggled softly. "It's fine. Not the first time someone has walked in on me nursing. Won't be the last." She waved Ochako over. "He's almost done. Come say hello." Ochako took a shuddering breath and approached the bed. The baby had just finished, and May held him upright to burp him. The tiniest little burp Ochako had ever heard came from his mouth, and she laughed at the sound. May held him out. "Would you like to hold him?" Ochako nodded, taking the baby gently in the crook of her arm. Golden eyes blinked sleepily as he yawned. Ochako could see a tuft of the finest green hair peeking out from under his hat. She swallowed against the massive lump in her throat and willed her chin to stop shaking, as she tried her best not to cry. "Oh, wow, May, he's perfect," she said, as she gently rocked him. "What's his name?" May looked at her husband as she adjusted her hospital gown, covering herself. Izuku looked up from his phone. "We're going to name him Tenya," he replied. May looked confused, as if this wasn't what was previously discussed, but said nothing. There was a knock on the door, and May called for them to come in. Katsuki entered, a hand over his eyes. "Are everyone's tits put away now?" he asked gruffly. Ochako giggled. May smiled. "Yeah, you're fine. Open your eyes and come meet your new nephew." Katsuki grumbled, but opened his eyes to see his wife smiling at him, holding the baby. Twin tear tracks were running down her face as she sniffed every third breath. He put an arm around her and squeezed her shoulders. "Careful, cheeks," he said softly. "They'll drown him if you keep crying like that." He grinned at his wife to show he was teasing. Ochako scowled at him. She was going to smack him for that, later, once there wasn't a baby in her arms. "Here," she said, instead, holding the baby out to him. "Hold him." Katsuki held his hands up in refusal. "Nope, I'll just drop him." "Don't worry about it, Katsuki," called May from the hospital bed, a wicked smile on her face. "I got 3 others. Dropping this one's no big deal." "May," Izuku protested weakly. "Oh, we'll be fine," May said. "Just hold him like Ochako is, and make sure you support his head." Ochako gave him a look. "Come on, Katsuki, it's good practice for when ours comes." She grinned teasingly. "Or are you too scared?" Katsuki growled. Face determined, he held out his arms. Ochako placed the baby in his grasp, and Katsuki felt the world come to a complete stop. He stared at the child in his arms, completely ignoring the other people in the room. He gently rocked his arms and started to hum. Ochako stared in surprise at her husband as he sang a lullaby to the baby. She looked over at Izuku, who had known him his entire life, but he had the same look of amazement on his face. She thought back to when Shoto was born, but she couldn't remember ever seeing Katsuki holding him. Finally, the lullaby ended. "Hey," he said, his voice low, gruff, and full of emotion. "So you're Katsuki, huh?" "Me too, kid." Midoriya found his voice first. Kachan? His name is Katsuki," interrupted May. She gave her husband her own look. Izuku smiled, placing a hand behind his head. "Right. I'm going to go. I need to find the nurse with the paperwork." He walked past Katsuki, who was still in his own little world, and patted his rival on the shoulder as he walked past. Ochako came over and took the baby Katsuki, handing him back to his mother. "We'll get out of your hair," she said, "but we'll see you soon, okay?" May smiled at her friend. "Just think, 7 or 8 months and it'll be your turn." That did it. Ochako immediately started bawling. May reached over with her free arm and pulled her into a hug, her own eyes glistening with tears. Ochako gathered herself together and backed away with a smile. Katsuki came up next to his wife, grabbing her hand and holding her tightly. Ochako was glad he did, because she was pretty sure her quirk had activated when she started crying, and his hand was the only thing keeping her from floating to the ceiling. He gave one last wave to the baby, nodded to May, and led Ochako out of the room. 12 weeks. Ochako gingerly pulled her head from the toilet, flushed, and pressed her forehead against the cool porcelain surface. 12 weeks pregnant, and the nausea didn't seem like it was getting any better. She let out a rather unladylike belch and grabbed tight to the toilet to keep from floating away. Neither was the gassiness. Katsuki knocked on the door. "You okay in there, Cheeks?" he called through the closed entryway. Katsuki had been wonderful in the last couple of months, taking care of her. He went out to get the snacks she was craving, he took her increased temper in stride, and he was always down to massage her feet or let her cry on his shoulder. However, the one thing he absolutely could not do was hold her hair and rub her back as she puked. He tried once, only to wind up with a bad case of the sympathetic pukes, making a mess in the sink as he tried to avoid throwing up on her. The couple agreed it would be best if he waited outside for her to finish, but going forward. "Okay," she responded. She stood once her stomach stopped doing flips and grabbed the mouthwash. Breath sanitized, she stepped out of the bathroom, still looking rather green. "I don't think I'm going to make it to the arcade today," she said, a hand rubbing her stomach. The couple had been invited out to the local arcade by Kirishima and Ashido. It had been a long time since they had last seen each other, and Ochako thought it was a good opportunity to tell her friends the news, now that they were out of the first trimester. Katsuki pulled her into a hug, laying a kiss on the top of her head. It's all right, he told her. We can cancel. Ochako pouted. No, we can't. The PR firm said they were going to go public about our pregnancy on Monday. We have to tell our friends before they find out in a tabloid. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Just send him a text then. It'll be fine. Yeah, because that worked out so well for you when you did that to your mother, she replied sourly. Ochako did like her in-laws, but since Katsuki refused to answer the phone when his mother called, Mitsuki had taken to calling her every day instead. Ochako felt that she'd gotten the short end of the stick in that exchange. Just go without me and tell them. Katsuki grumbled, but the look on her face let him know he wasn't going to win this argument. Fine, he sighed. I'll tell him about the brat. Ochako gave him a quick peck on the cheek in thanks, then she held her in her stomach. Sorry, I have to... She ran back to the bathroom and slammed the door. Katsuki could hear her retching through the door and had to put his hand over his own mouth to keep from making a mess on the floor. Baku bro, you made it! Kirishima waved at his friend from across the arcade, his boisterous voice booming over the sound of 100 arcade machines blaring their soundtracks. Katsuki winced as the wall of noise assailed him and turned down his hearing aids. Kirishima was always loud enough to make up for the lower volume anyway. He nodded at the redhead as he approached. Kirishima had really bulked up in the years since UA, in addition to the height he gained. He was about 5 centimeters taller than Katsuki and outweighed him by maybe 15 kilos, all muscle. He'd really taken All Might's advice from first year about being a bulldozer to heart. However, he didn't seem to understand just how large he was, like a Great Dane who wants to be a lapdog. Kirishima enveloped Katsuki in a hug with one arm, squeezing the breath out of him. It's been so long, dude. How you been? Katsuki roughly pushed off his friend and punched him hard in the shoulder. He may as well have punched a mountain for all the good it did. Fuck, dude. You have to squeeze me so tight all the time, he complained. I'm not a villain you have to knock unconscious. Kirishima had the decency to look embarrassed. Just then, someone leapt up onto Kirishima's back, arms looping around his neck. Katsuki flinched, thinking it was a villain attack, but quickly realized it was Kirishima's girlfriend when a pink head popped up over his shoulder and kissed his cheek. Kirishima barely acknowledged he was up there. Hi, Katsuki, Ashido cheerily greeted him. Her dark eyes scanned the arcade from her higher vantage point. Where's Ochako? Her morning sickness was bad today, so she decided to stay home, he replied. He was supposed to tell them, but it was always more fun to let them guess. Come on, I'll kick your ass at that All Might game. He walked over to the machine, digging in his pocket for change. Kirishima nodded and followed Katsuki to the machine. Ashido, however, had realized what had been said. She collected her jaw from the floor, kicking excitedly from her elevated position, trying to get the words to form in her stunned mouth. But wait, morning sickness? She finally managed. Yeah, it's been kind of rough, said Katsuki over his shoulder, barely paying attention as he selected his character in the game. Hopefully she gets over it now that she's in the second trimester, but some women are just sick the whole time. Ashido stared at him, her jaw resting against Kirishima's shoulder. She dropped down and slid between her boyfriend and the game. Hey, are you hearing this? Babe, you're killing me here, complained Kirishima. He tried to play around her. I heard. Ochako's got morning sickness. It really sucks, too. I remember when my sister was... A light finally came on, and he stopped moving. He stared at Ashido, then Katsuki. Katsuki took the opportunity to pull off a 20-hit combo on his stunned opponent. She's pregnant? Yeah, replied the father-to-be. About 12 weeks. We're going public with it next week. Figured you guys should know before it hits in the news. Kirishima grabbed his friend in a massive bear hug, Ashido getting caught in the crossfire. He picked up both heroes as if they weighed nothing, tears streaming down his face. I'm so fucking happy for you, bro! You've got to let us put in the shower. What names have you picked out? Can I see the ultrasound? I'm so happy! Katsuki swore he was going to die of happiness, or lack of air, as he pounded on Kirishima's arms until the large man released them. He gasped for breath. Just don't grab my wife like that, or I'll have to murder you. Kirishima smiled, embarrassed, and put a hand behind his head. 15 weeks. Ochako stood in the bathroom, naked, staring at herself in the mirror. She had undressed to get in the shower, but the sight of herself in the mirror over the sink had made her pause. Ever since her second year at UA, she'd noticed her body changing as she lost fat and built muscle. Now it seemed like the opposite was happening. Her hands cupped her breasts, lifting the weight. While she was never lacking in the chest area, she'd ballooned since becoming pregnant, rivaling even Yayorozu these days. They were always sore, and none of her bras fit well anymore. Her hands migrated down to her stomach. She used to have a six-pack. Now that she was confined to a desk duty and wasn't in the gym every day, it was gone. In its place was a convex swell that indicated the presence of her baby. She could even start to make out the lines of stretch marks that were marring her skin. Lotion and shea butter were having minimal effect, preventing them from forming. She was happy she was pregnant. She wanted to be pregnant. She couldn't wait to hold her baby. But actually being pregnant wasn't very fun. The steam from the shower had clouded the mirror. She should get in soon and stop wasting so much water. Then she heard the door open behind her, and in walked her husband. "Cheeks, you okay?" he asked. "Water's been running for a while now." Ochako sighed deeply, reaching into the shower and shutting off the water. "I'm fat," she declared, rubbing her bulge. Kacchako came up behind her and gently wrapped his arms around her, resting his hands on her belly. He kissed the back of her head. "Not fat, pregnant." "I gained like 5 kilos already," she responded. "Not much of that is baby." "So you've gained some weight. It's good for the baby. Besides," one of his hands migrated round to her ass, "I think your curves are sexy." Ochako could see his dirty smile in the mirror and blushed. It had been a while. She shook her head. "Okay, but I'm getting stretch marks, and you love my six-pack. Don't deny it." Kacchako did love his wife's hard body. He'd spent many an hour kissing every defined muscle. "Sure, but I like your belly too. As for the stretch marks..." He turned her body sideways, showing off the big scar on her thigh. "How'd you get this?" he asked. "You know how. You were there. It was that villain last year with the fingernails that he could turn into knives. He got me good when I got in close." "And you still took him down like the badass you are," he replied. He turned her the other way, showing a scar on her arm. "What about this one?" Ochako smiled, having figured out where he was going with this. "That one was from when the concrete pillar fell on my arm and I needed surgery." "And what did you do to the villain that dropped it on you?" "I made that column float and beat him with it one-handed." "Your stretch marks are just one more scar, one more thing to show off how badass my wife is." He laid a kiss on the crook of her neck. "And I think every one of them is sexy as hell." Ochako melted into the kiss, her overactive hormones shifting her libido into overdrive. She reached over and turned the water back on. "Join me in the shower?" Katsuki's lecherous smile widened. "I thought you'd never ask." "Okay, Bakugo-san, please get in the chair and lift your shirt, and we'll see how things are going in there," said the ultrasound tech. Ochako nervously climbed into the seat and raised the hem of her shirt to her breast, showing off her bulging belly. Hopefully today was the day they were going to learn the sex of their baby. They could have learned during the last scan 2 weeks ago, but the baby had stubbornly refused to open its legs. Mitsuki had had a field day with that one, saying the stubborn little brat was obviously her son's child. That, of course, set off a screaming match between mother and son that had given Ochako a migraine. Today they were feeling lucky. So lucky they decided to invite their mothers to watch. Mitsuki was there in person, much to Katsuki's chagrin, but as Mie was too far to travel for the day, Ochako's mother was joining by video call on Katsuki's phone. The tech squeezed gel onto Ochako's belly, making her jump. You'd think they'd warm up the stuff first. "Do you have names picked out?" he asked. "We're still arguing about that," replied Ochako as the tech moved the sensor around her stomach. "We have a short list, but we can't agree on a name for either sex." "What names are on the short list?" asked Mitsuki. "I like the name Ozubaru Dokatsumi for a girl," said Katsuki, looking away from his wife as he said it. This was an argument he'd lost before. Ochako sighed. "We're not naming our daughter after your great aunt," she replied for what seemed to be the 100th time. Mitsuki broke out in uproarious laughter. The tech chuckled. "Well, hopefully we can narrow it down today. Would you prefer a boy or a girl?" "I really hope it's a girl," gushed Ochako, looking at the tech with longing in her eyes, as if he could make it happen. "I keep looking at baby clothes, and the girl clothes are so cute. Boy clothes are just boring." Cheeks?" said Katsuki with a smile. "Those are boy parts." He pointed at the image projected on the wall. Whereas previously the grainy image they'd seen of their baby had been side-on, showing the child in profile, today the scanner had gotten underneath, showing 2 legs and a penis and scrotum between them. It looked like somebody had dropped their pants and sat on a glass of a copy machine. Mitsuki started laughing. From Katsuki's phone, Ochako's mom let out an excited gasp. Katsuki squeezed his wife's hand and kissed her knuckles. Ochako teared up, a little wistful, but smiled hugely at Katsuki. "It's a boy," she said. "It's a boy," he replied. "Ichiro," suggested Ochako. "Firstborn? Too common," replied Katsuki. "Besides, Kirishima would think we're naming the kid after him." "Well, we could name him after one of our friends, like Deku and May have done. It would be nice to name him Izuku, since they named their son after you." "No," Katsuki said a little louder than he intended. He sighed. "No, not our first kid." He smiled mischievously at her. Maybe for our third son. You up to doing this at least twice more? Ochako blanched at the thought. Sure, they were still young, and they could potentially have more kids, but this pregnancy was really kicking her ass. Let's finish baking this sweet bun before we decide on making more, eh? Fair enough, he replied. Kyoshi? Soundless? I think you're being optimistic with that one. Babies are noisy, she teased. Sora? No video games, remember? Taichi? Gods, I hope not. Ochako winced and crossed her legs. Taichi meant large one. Yasuhiro? Calm and knowledgeable. My complete opposite, eh? He teased. Put it on the short list. "24 weeks. So as you can see, said the apartment manager, we have stone countertops throughout, gas cooktop, bar seating on the island, a powder room in the main living area, 2 bedrooms, and a full bath between the bedrooms. The couple looked around the apartment. Katsuki was impressed with the kitchen, but something was missing. Is there a balcony? He asked. Off the main bedroom, the manager replied. It's quite a lovely view of the city, too, if I do say so myself. On a clear day, you can see all the way to the All Might Memorial Park in Camino. Katsuki nodded. He looked over at his wife. It seemed to him as if she was getting bigger every day. More beautiful, too. She had a look in her eye. He could tell she loved it. What's the damage? He asked the manager. 95,000 yen a month if you sign a 3-year lease. It would be a little bit of a stretch, but they could manage it. He looked at his wife. She was trying her best to maintain a poker face for the manager, and failing spectacularly. She looked up at him, employing her best puppy dog eyes. Katsuki sighed. Knock it down to 90,000 and we'll sign today, he said. We're both registered heroes. You'll save on your insurance by having us here. Wonderful, replied the manager. I believe that can be arranged. Out. Katsuki, I'm pregnant, not an invalid, Ochako said over her shoulder. She was standing on a stepladder, a loaded paint roller in her hand. Exactly. You're fucking pregnant. You're not supposed to be around paint fumes. He gestured behind him. That's why we invited these losers over, remember? The losers in question were Kirishima, Ashido, Sero, and Midoriya. Hey, shouted Ashido indignantly. We're doing you a favor, you know. Yeah, you're getting pizza and beer later. He turned to his wife. Out! She pouted, gesturing with her roller at one wall. The windows are open. It's well ventilated. Katsuki crossed his arms. Don't care, cheeks. Out! Ochako sighed. Fine. Paint the walls this dark blue color and the trim and door white to match the furniture. We'll add the star decals once the paint is dried. She stepped down off the ladder, rubbing her back. Katsuki enveloped her in a hug. Thank you, he said. Now go sit on the couch and watch Netflix until you run out of shows to watch. We'll get this done today. He kissed her cheek, then used the closeness as an opportunity. There's cherry mochi in the fridge, he whispered in her ear. Ochako's expression changed from perturbed to excited. She looked at her husband with stars in her eyes. She gave him a quick peck on the cheek, handed him the paint roller, and scurried out of the room. Katsuki sighed and turned to his helpers. All right, idiots, you heard the lady. Blue walls, white trim and door. She and I can take care of the stars when it dries. He turned to get to work. Kirishima hid a giggle behind a hand. Sero put a piece of tape over his mouth to keep from guffawing. Midoriya smiled but managed not to laugh. Ashido's laughter echoed around the empty room and disturbed the neighbors on the floors above and below. Katsuki had a blue stripe along the back of his shirt. Ochako had still been holding her paint roller when he hugged her. Ochako was bored. She lay on the couch, scanning through the endless choices on the streaming service, and was just sick of it all. She was hot, uncomfortable, couldn't help with painting, and had nobody to talk to, and she couldn't even find anything worth watching on TV. She pushed the last bite of her mochi into her mouth and chewed slowly. Even food was boring. She wished she could at least be helpful. The crib was still needed to be assembled, but it was in the nursery with the painters. She already finished her 1,000 paper cranes and hung them on the mobile armature. There was tons to do to get ready for her son, but she just couldn't do any of it. Maybe she should text May and see what she was up to? No, she already had her hands full with her brood since Izuku was here painting. She shifted in her seat, trying to remember the last time she was comfortable. It didn't help that her stomach was fluttering, making her feel nauseous, almost as if something was moving in there. Katsuki! Katsuki heard him tearing down the hall, hands sparkling, ready to fight. He had paint splatters all over his clothes and even a blue fingerprint on one cheek. Probably a joke from Ashido. What's the matter? He scanned the room looking for trouble. He's moving, whispered Ochako. Huh? Where? He looked at his wife, hoping for a clue as to where to attack. She was crying, but had a small smile on her face. Her shirt was lifted up to her breasts, and her hands were caressing her stomach. I can feel him moving. Our son. It's the first time I've noticed, but I can feel him. Kacchako sank to his knees as the adrenaline drained from his body. He's moving? Uh-huh. He walked on his knees to the couch, staring at her belly. Can I feel? She nodded. I'm not sure you'll be able to feel anything yet, but I can on the inside. She smiled wider. We have a little martial artist on our hands. Kacchako chuckled. He placed both his hands on her belly, one on top and one on bottom, then placed his cheek in the middle, covering as much surface area as he could. Ochako ran a hand through his hair. Hey, Kachan, everything all right in? Midoriya had followed Kacchako out in the living room when he didn't return. He stopped short when he saw the tender moment on the couch, turned on his heel, and walked back into the bedroom, happy for his friends. Kacchako? Kacchako. Hey, Dynamite! Kacchako woke up with a start. Oh, good, you're awake, said Ochako. Buh? What? Kacchako looked blearily at the clock on his nightstand. 2:30? What the fuck, Cheeks? What's wrong? His baby? No, nothing's wrong with the baby, she reassured him. I couldn't sleep. Ochako could have sworn she heard him blink at her. You couldn't sleep and decided to wake me up, he asked incredulously. I just had this craving. I think if I sate it, I'll be able to sleep. Cheeks, the stores are all closed. If we don't have it, it's going to have to wait till morning. He turned over to go back to sleep. I'm not craving food, I'm craving dick. He sat up and looked at her. What? I need you to put your penis inside me so I can sleep. Kacchako continued to stare at his wife. Look, my hormones have been going crazy all night. I tried to take care of myself without waking you, but it wasn't enough, she said, her voice a little whiny. So please, fuck me. Kacchako growled, rolled over in bed on top of his wife, tossing the blankets aside. He carefully kept his weight up off her belly and kissed her deeply from above. This was one craving he was going to enjoy helping her satisfy. 30 weeks. Ochako felt like a whale. She was huge, or at least she felt like it. Her boobs were enormous and sore all the time. Her belly was gargantuan and pulled her center of gravity forward, so she had a backache most of the day. Her feet and ankles were monstrously swollen, making it difficult to stand or walk for long periods of time. It seriously made her wonder how any woman wanted to have more than one child, let alone May, who was already planning her 5th pregnancy to surrogate for their friends. And now she had to plaster a happy smile on her face because her friends were throwing her a shower. They were headed to the Deku Hero Agency, which was playing host for the festivities. Even with 4 kids, the Midoriyas still had plenty of room, probably part of the reason they hadn't stopped having kids. Ochako knew the plan was to have it on the rooftop patio, but an early spring snowstorm had blown through the night before, forcing the party inside. She shivered as a cold breeze came up the street and stepped closer to her husband for warmth. He obliged her on said request and put an arm around her shoulders. At least I'm not pregnant during the summer, she said. I'd be miserable to be this colossal in July. Colossal? Asked Kacchako with a smirk. I'm tired of just saying big all the time, so I busted out the thesaurus. She rubbed her stomach. Desk duty is boring, okay? Kacchako smiled, but didn't say anything else about it. So how long do we need to be here anyway? Ochako gave him a swat on the shoulder. Be nice. They went through a lot of effort to throw us a party and bought stuff for the baby so we don't have to. Right. They reached the agency and opened the front door, the bells on the door jangling to announce their arrival. Congratulations! Shouted the multitude of friends in the room. Blue balloons and streamers were hung on the walls. A banner read, Welcome Baby Bakugo in big block letters. A couple of the Midoriya munchkins were in attendance and ran up to the couple of the hour, hugging their knees. Ochako plastered her best fake smile on her face. Thank you, everyone, she said, trying not to trip over the 2-year-old wrapped around her ankles. She saw Kacchako in her peripheral vision, struggling not to lose his temper with Izuku's daughter, who was currently trying to scale him like a rock wall. Is this some of what they had to look forward to? Izuku and Mei came out of the crowd to collect their children. They were surrounded by well-wishers. Ida, Aoyama, Ashido, Kirishima, Kaminari, Jiro, and Asui were all there. Ochako thanked each one for coming, a little wistful for that their other friends couldn't make it. But then again, hero work meant you seldom got days off. Ochako saw Jiro press a button on a remote, and a stereo started playing music. Ashido brought her a drink, one that was slightly disappointingly non-alcoholic. especially since she could see everyone else seem to be drinking champagne. Ashido gave her a big hug and led her to an overstuffed recliner to sit. "So how are you? What's it like being pregnant?" she asked. Ochako took a drink of her juice and pointed to their host. "Why don't you ask May? She's about to do it for the 5th time." May overheard her name being mentioned and came over. Ochako hadn't seen her in a while and found herself staring at the mechanic's flat stomach. How the hell did she bounce back like that? "When are you getting knocked up again?" Ochako teased. Hatsume shrugged. "They harvested my eggs, and the boys can give their sperm whenever. The doctor doesn't want to try to implant anything yet, though. Says it's too close to my last pregnancy and that I needed more time to heal." She added finger quotes to show her opinion of her doctor. "So I probably won't be pregnant again till fall. Idiot doesn't think my body can handle it yet." "I was just asking Ochako what it was like," said Ashido. May shrugged. "What do you want to know? At first, it mostly feels like you just had the flu for 3 months. "Oh yeah," added Ochako. "I was sick as a dog. Spent so much time in the bathroom with my head in the toilet." Ashido winced. "And be ready for your quirk to go haywire. I still need to peel myself off the ceiling in the morning sometimes." "The second trimester gets better, though," continued May. "That's when your hair and nails get all shiny." Ochako scoffed. "My hair started falling out instead of getting thicker. I've clogged the shower drain twice in 3 months. May laughed, slightly embarrassed about her better fortune. "Sorry, every pregnancy is different. Even my 4 were all different from each other. Inca was easy as Physics 301, but I was sick and sore the whole way through with Katsuki." Ochako just grunted and frowned at her friend. She wasn't so sure if May's simile was supposed to be good or bad. Ashido was still wide-eyed, staring at both women. "Oh, okay, well, what about the good stuff you hear about? Like when the baby starts moving?" "Oh, sure, it's nice at first," said Ochako. "Then the little brat stomps on your bladder and you pee yourself right in the middle of the grocery store, and some pimply little 16-year-old asks you if you need an ambulance because he thinks your water broke." "Ooh, that happened to me too," cried May with a laugh. "Twice!" Ashido went pale, which was an interesting shade on the pink woman. Ochako continued. "Now I'm in my 3rd trimester. I'm constantly sore. The kid is bruising me on the inside. I have wide mood swings, which I'm sure Katsuki doesn't find very fun. I go from boiling hot to freezing at the drop of a hat, and I can't get comfortable to save my life." She punctuated that sentence by reaching behind her and adjusting her pillow. May put her hand on Ochiko's and gave it a light squeeze. The brunette smiled in thanks. "So," started Ashido. "Why do you keep doing it?" she asked May. "The sex is amazing." Ashido spit out a drink. Ochako thought about it for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, that's certainly a plus." May cackled at Ochiko's reply, remembering that not long ago she was too shy to talk about it. She turned to Ashido. "Seriously, though, it's worth it. Once the baby comes and you get to hold them and cuddle them and pinch their little cheeks, it makes the whole thing feel like it was a breeze." She gestured to her daughter, who was playing in Izuku's lap. "It was maybe 6 months after she was born that I was seriously thinking about having another. I know this next one isn't going to be mine, but I want everyone to have those feelings about their child. And I'm more than happy to go through a little discomfort so the boys can have that." Ochako felt a lump in her throat at her response. Ashido sniffed and wiped her own eyes. "That's so beautiful," said the pink woman. Ochako nodded, not trusting that she wouldn't bust out in ugly sobs if she opened her mouth. "Now, giving birth, that fucking sucks," said May, taking a sip of her drink. Ochako burst out laughing at the sudden change in mood. "What? No baby to help you have a baby?" she teased. May giggled, shaking her head. "Nah, I never delved too deeply into biomed devices other than my pregnancy test. Just pray you don't need an episiotomy." Ochako winced and pushed her thighs together. Ashido looked concerned. "What's an episiotomy?" May smiled evilly. Ashido found Kirishima chatting with Ida. "Hi, Ida, sorry, can I borrow Ashido for a second?" She pulled on his arm, dragging him away from this conversation before Ida could reply. "Hey, what's up?" "Are you absolutely sure?" she asked, a look of determination in her eye. "Sure? About what? You mean..." "Yes, I'm going to be miserable for like a year, so I need you to be sure you can deal with that." "Miserable?" He looked over at Ochako, who was laughing at something with Jiro. "She doesn't look miserable." Ashido rolled her eyes. "Men." "Besides, it could be months before you get..." "Shh!" Ashido hissed. "Keep your voice down. I don't want to steal Ochako's thunder by telling people we're trying." She looked around, but nobody was looking their way. "Besides, it might be sooner than you think. I've been feeling kind of off all week." She gestured to her drink. "This is sparkling cider, not champagne." Kirishima's smile could have lit up half of Tokyo. "You mean, you might be pregnant?" he said softly. "Pregnant? Who said pregnant?" Ashido whipped round to see May looking at her hungrily. Do you need a test? I can help with that. Come on! The mechanic grabbed Ashido's arm in a vice-like grip and dragged her to her basement workshop, with Ashido protesting the whole way down. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed in the party room, making everyone look up. There was a weird sound like a plane taking off, then silence. Yahoo! Came Kirishima's cry from downstairs. Katsuki shook his head. Guess his little brat was going to have a friend. 35 weeks. Bakugo-san, I'm a little concerned with some of these numbers, said her obstetrician. The protein levels in your urine a little high. Ochako looked at the doctor, worried. Everything had been fine her entire pregnancy, and now she had protein in her urine? Okay, what does that mean? The doctor turned from her computer monitor and faced her directly. High protein levels in your urine is a sign of preeclampsia. We don't want it to progress into eclampsia because that can be fatal for both you and the baby. Ochako felt her heart skip a beat at that news. She wished Katsuki had been able to come today, but they figured it was just a routine checkup and he had to work. The doctor reached over and took her hand. There's nothing to worry about yet, she assured her patient. We caught it early, so we can keep an eye on your levels, and there are things we can do. She sat back. First, I'm putting you on bed rest as of today. No more work in the office, no work at home. You need to relax and have as little stress as possible. Your maternity leave starts today. Ochako nodded, still panicking a little. The doctor reached behind a cupboard and pulled out a jug. Second, I need you to fill this jug. Ochako did a double take. Fill it? With what? The doctor smiled. Katsuki staggered in through the door to their apartment, exhausted by the workday. He was home late, having been stuck at a bank robbery that turned into a hostage situation. He'd been at the scene for 12 hours, maintaining security detail, while the hostage negotiators worked. He was exhausted, starving, and so thirsty he could drain a lake. But first, he had to piss like a racehorse. They didn't give him a bathroom break either. He threw his duffel bag onto the couch, his equipment clanging noisily within, and danced to the bathroom. He made it just in time, sighing noisily as he emptied his bladder into the toilet. Finished and zipped, he went to the sink to wash his hands, but there was something in the sink. It looked like kind of an upside-down hat, and it was graduated inside of the pan. He carefully moved it aside, figuring it must have something to do with his pregnant wife, and washed up. Relieved, he made his way to the kitchen and opened the fridge to see if there was anything left over from whatever Ochako had made for dinner. He opened the door and was greeted by a large jug front and center of the fridge, right next to the orange juice. On it was written the words, "Urine, do not drink." He pulled the jug out of the fridge, watching the yellow liquid in the bottom swirl with the movement. He untwisted the cap, put his nose to the mouth, and took a sniff. He drew back as the sour smell of urea assaulted his nostrils. I don't know what I was expecting, he said out loud. Replacing the cap, he put the jug back in the fridge and went to the bedroom. Ochako was always feeling run down these days. She probably went to bed early when he told her he was going to be late. He found her sitting up in bed, propped up on pillows. The TV was on, tuned to some goofy panel show. A tub of ice cream was melting on the table next to her. Her head lolled to the side, and she was sound asleep. He found the remote in her unresponsive hand and turned off the TV, then the light next to her. He went to leave to get something to eat, but he paused when he heard her take a deep breath and begin to stir. Katsuki? She yawned, stretching. I was watching that. He clicked, but it was more of a chuckle than a sound of derision. No, you weren't. You were asleep. He pointed a thumb at the door. What's with the piss in the fridge? Ochako sighed, turned the lamp back on, and patted the bed next to her. When he sat, she told him what the doctor had told her. So I need to be on bed rest until the baby comes. No stress. And I need to fill that urine jug for 24 hours and have you take it to my doctor for testing once a week. If the protein levels get too high, they'll induce labor. Katsuki was stunned. So, everything was okay otherwise? Ochako nodded. Yeah, he's moving around in there, has a good, strong heartbeat, everything looks great. We just need to be careful and we should be fine. Katsuki sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're taking this whole life-threatening pregnancy thing a lot better than I am. His worry was etched across his face. It wasn't a look he usually wore. Ochako put a hand on his. I've had a couple of hours and a tub of chocolate ice cream to get used to the idea. Besides, we put our lives on the line at work every day. How's this any different? Well, for one thing, I can't explode the proteins and make them go away. Ochako laughed. It's going to be fine, she said. We'll get through it together. 38 weeks. Ochako hung up the phone and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was time. She'd been on bed rest for 3 weeks now, but her protein levels were still higher than the doctor liked, so she was being admitted at the hospital as soon as she could get there. Okay, first, text Kacchako to meet her at the hospital. Endeavor already knew this was coming and had approved his time off as soon as she was told to go. Next, call her mom. It would take a few hours for her parents to make the trip. Better call Mitsuki too, or else she wouldn't find out until the kid's first birthday if she left it at Kacchako. Mitsuki's phone went to voicemail. She left a message. The go bag was by the front door with the baby carrier. Oh, right. Change clothes. Last thing she wanted was to ride the train in her jammies. She sniffed an armpit. Probably no time for a shower. Deodorant would have to do. She struggled into a pair of pants and a shirt so she could go outside, grabbed the bag and the carrier, made sure she had everything, and opened the door. Only to run headlong into her mother-in-law. Ochako, said Mitsuki. I was on my way over when I got your message. Come on, I brought the car. It'll be better than taking the train. She took the go bag from Ochako's shoulder and grabbed her by the hand, practically dragging her out in the hallway. Ochako had to rip her hand out of Mitsuki's in order to lock the door behind them. Kacchako burst through the doors of the maternity ward. The nurse sitting at the reception desk looked over her glasses at him chidingly, displeased with his boisterous entrance. Her expression was one of exasperation, as if he wasn't the first overly noisy father to burst in this week, or even today. Name? She asked in a harsh monotone. Bakugo Ochako, he responded, trying to keep his temper under control and his voice down. I'm her husband, Kacchako. The nurse sighed and looked down at her computer monitor. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, hitting way more keys than Kacchako would have thought necessary to search for his wife. Finally, she turned her gaze back to him. Room 504, down the hall, past the security doors, turn right at the T, the room's on the left. She turned back to whatever she was working on her computer, ignoring him completely. Kacchako clenched his teeth lest he lose his temper and get kicked out. He nodded to the receptionist and hurried down the hall. As he was buzzed through the security doors, he marveled at their sheer size. Was it really necessary to lock down the maternity ward that hard? He guessed if some villain was trying to steal his kid, he'd want them in place too. He made it to his wife's room, took a deep, shuddering breath, and knocked. He heard Ochako call through the door for him to come in, and he entered. The room was massive, with wood paneling throughout. There was a hospital bed in which his wife sat, tubes coming out of her arm. Off to one side was a couch that was probably going to be his bed for the night. There was also something that looked like a smaller hospital bed, but at waist height that had all sorts of gizmos integrated into it. Must be where they put the kid. Kacchako had never seen a hospital room so large before, certainly not for just one patient. He supposed, though, that when the pushing started, there was going to be a whole bunch of people in the room at the same time, and they all needed room to stand. He crossed the room and took Ochako's hand, pulling her close and nuzzling her hair. How are you? He asked. She shrugged. Okay, I guess. Your mom brought me in her car. She went to look for something to eat a little while ago. She stifled a laugh as his expression changed to one of apprehension, and he looked at the closed doorway. She'll be a little while, don't worry. She looked down at her tummy, covered in her hospital gown. So will I, by the sound of it. They hooked me up to a drug that's supposed to induce labor, and it will likely be tomorrow before anything important happens. Hope you brought up a good book. Kacchako sighed. This was always the worst part about hero work. Hurry up and wait. He pulled up a chair next to her bed and got comfortable. Kacchako woke with a start as the door to the hospital room was opened, bleeding light into the darkened room. He blinked awake, watching as someone approached Ochako's bed, checking the monitors. He was about to go back to sleep when the person spoke. Mrs. Bakugo? I'm sorry, but I have to wake you. It's Dr. Yamada. Kacchako sat up, instantly awake as the adrenaline hit. Was it finally time? It was her second night at the hospital. Ochako's water had broken yesterday around lunch. They'd said she'd been progressing, and even gave her an epidural. But it seemed to Kacchako that progression was very slow. Apparently, the doctor agreed. You got to 5 centimeters dilation, then stopped. We don't want to wait any longer due to the preeclampsia, so we're going to do a C-section. The door opened again, and more people in scrubs entered, prepping to take her to the operating room. Kacchako? Came a small, worried voice. As the lights were turned on, he could see the fear on her face. He'd never seen that look before, not even when they took on the worst villains at work. He stood and grabbed her hand, ready to argue with the doctor, when his thunder was stolen. He's coming to the OR too, don't worry. Nurse Saotome is going to give him some scrubs, and he'll be right behind us. Kacchako deflated, his anger rushing out with his breath. He kissed his wife on the forehead and backed away from the bed as they wheeled her out of the room. He turned to the short, buxom, red-headed nurse that was holding his scrubs. "First kid?" she asked. He stared at her. "Yeah." She patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, all this is just a precaution. We'll have your son out in a jiffy." She turned on her heel to leave. "I'll wait outside for you to get dressed, then I'll take you to her. Don't dawdle." Dressed in paper scrubs, hairnet, and mask, Kacchako entered the OR behind his guide. Ochako was lying on the table, her lower half obscured from view by a large drape. Considering they were about to cut into her gut, Kacchako was glad he couldn't see anything. He sat on a stool next to her head and took her hand, but she didn't respond to the squeeze. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. "Oh, don't worry about her," said a man standing over her. From the info on the computer monitor in front of him, Kacchako guessed he was the anesthesiologist. "She was just starting to have a panic attack, so I had to sedate her. She'll be fine once this is all over." "Panic attack?" asked Kacchako. "Yeah, something about a surgery she had previously? Must have been some nasty memories that resurfaced. It's okay, she doesn't need to be awake for this." Kacchako thought back, but couldn't remember her having a panic attack before. He'd ask about her later. He looked up at the clock on the wall. 1:30 in the morning. He had a vague memory of his mother saying something about kids being born in the middle of the night. What time was he born again? 2 a.m.? He shook his head. He'd been asleep for a few hours already, and the adrenaline of impending fatherhood was losing some of its potency. Finally, the doctor said out loud, "Okay, Dad, are you ready to meet your son?" There was a gurgling sound, and a cry, and then from behind the drape, the doctor held up a screaming gremlin. He's pasty white, covered in fluids, cord hanging from his belly, screaming like a banshee, and the most perfect thing Kacchako has ever seen. The cord was cut, and the red-headed nurse from before took the baby over to be weighed and checked over. Kacchako heard her call the weight out in time of birth, but he couldn't focus on anything other than his son. His son. He's a dad now. It hadn't really felt different before. He'd watched as Ochako went through all kinds of changes. He built the crib, felt the baby move under her skin, but he never felt much different than before she was pregnant. Now, everything had changed. Finally, the boy was cleaned off, wrapped in a blanket, and the nurse carried him over. "Ever held a baby before?" she asked. Kacchako nodded dumbly and held his arms out, taking the child in his arms. He swallowed past a huge lump in his throat and looked at Ochako. She was still out of it. He was on his own. Thankfully, being born must be tiring. The boy was fast asleep. The doctor must have finished sewing Ochako back up because the drape was taken down. "All right," he said. "Back to the room. Dad, you take the lead. Stay close to the bed." Kacchako nodded. He walked out of the OR carrying his precious cargo, trying to walk close to the bed as his wife was in, trying not to get in the way, trying not to keel over from exhaustion. The doctor waved him forward, so he took a few more steps. The door he was standing near closed suddenly. Kacchako backed up to make sure he was on the same side as the rest of the little parade when they shut. "Shit," he mumbled, looking down at the son, who thankfully hadn't seemed to notice. A baby who could sleep through anything. He didn't know how it got so lucky. "It's okay," called the doctor from behind him. "That's my fault. I told him to keep going." The doctor came around the bed and went to a panel on the wall, waving his badge against the sensor. The alarm stopped and the doors opened. He looked at Kacchako. "And now you know what will happen if you try to go for a walk with your son," he joked. Kacchako just nodded. The little parade made it back to the room. Kacchako still held the baby. He wasn't sure he wanted to put him down. He thanked the doctor as he left and sat back on the cot where he was asleep not an hour before. The red-headed nurse approached. "He's probably hungry. Here." She handed him a bottle. "Since Mama's out, you can feed him this formula. There's more in the drawers under the bassinet if you need it. Diapers, too." He took the bottle from the nurse, thanking her. Once she saw he had a handle on everything, she turned and left. Finally alone, Kacchako found his voice for the first time in what seemed like forever. "Hey," he managed softly. "It's great to finally see you in person, Yasuhiro. You can call me Dad." Kacchako held Yasuhiro for well over an hour, just staring at him, humming softly. Finally, his own exhaustion caught up with him, and he put the baby in the bassinet, went back to sleep. He woke a couple hours later when he heard some rustling of blankets. He blinked blearily and saw Ochako sitting up in bed, reaching over to pull the bassinet closer. That's right, she'd have an epidural. She probably couldn't feel her legs yet. He stood and went to hand her the baby. Ochako sighed contentedly when she finally had Yasuhiro in her arms. She looked up at her husband, tears pooling in her eyes. We did it, she said softly. Katsuki smiled. Fuck yeah, we did. She snorted, trying to stop herself from laughing too loudly. You're going to have to learn to watch your language. He doesn't understand yet. He placed a kiss on top of her head. I love you. I love you too, Katsuki. She shifted over in the bed, making room. Katsuki joined her, careful not to sit on any tubes or wires, put his arm around her shoulders, and enjoyed the silent comfort. Katsuki didn't know how long they sat together. His internal clock was still screwed up by the lack of sleep the night before. Ochako took off her hospital robe to feed Yasuhiro. You should take your shirt off too, she told him. Katsuki blinked in confusion. My tits don't work like that. Ochako giggled. No, I mean to have some skin time. It's good for bonding, even for dads. Man, this exhaustion was really going to get annoying for the next few months. Let him finish up, then I'll take him, he said. There was a knock at the door. Ochako called for the person to come in, reminding Katsuki of their visit to see Mei when her son was born. Considering the only people they were expecting right now were nurses and doctors, he understood now how the accident had happened. He figured he owed the mechanic an apology. In strolled Nurse Saotome. I'm about to go off shift, so I thought I'd check to see if you needed anything, said the redhead. She smiled at the sight of Ochako feeding her baby. Looks like he took to breastfeeding easily. Good. Some kids have a hard time, especially when they get a bottle of formula first. Ochako looked puzzled. When did he have formula? I had to feed him last night when you were still unconscious, Katsuki said. And he did a great job of it, too, piped up the nurse. Looked like he'd been doing it forever. Ochako smiled at her husband's blush. Makes me wish I had a photo, she said. That was the other thing. I need to check on Mom to make sure there wasn't any side effects from the sedative. Ochako shook her head. No, I feel fine now. She saw the worried look on Katsuki's face. It's fine. I got a little scared. Every surgery I've had was after I got injured by a villain, and some of those memories came back with a vengeance. They offered to sedate me, and I accepted. She put a hand over his. I knew you'd take care of Yasuhiro while I was out. All right, I'll let my replacement know how you're doing. You're going to be moved to a recovery room shortly. It'll be a little while before the epidural wears off, so we're going to be here another day or so. You can start having visitors if you like too, so start calling people with the good news. The couple thanked the nurse as she left, and were alone again with her child. Katsuki took his shirt off and held the son against his skin. Ochako grabbed her phone and took a picture of her dozing baby, comfy against his daddy. She turned the phone around to show him. I don't think I've ever seen you with a smile that big, she said. Then she laughed as Katsuki turned red as a tomato. Well, of course I'm happy. I have my newborn son in my arms. He leaned back in his chair. You should get some sleep. I got him. Ochako smiled at her boys. All right. Wake me if you need a nap, too. Bakugo Yasuhiro, born by C-section on 19 May, 1:42 a.m., 3.515 kilograms, 50.8 centimeters. Mother and child doing fine. Two years later. Katsuki sat on a park bench watching his son play on the playground equipment. The boy was racing around the soft rubberized area, chasing after a pink boy who was a good head shorter than him. He looked over at Kirishima, who was sitting next to him, a worried look on his face as the son laughed and screamed with his older friend. He's fine, shitty hair. He emphasized this with a punch on his friend's shoulder. Kirishima chuckled. I know, it's just hard to remember sometimes that he's not that squishy little thing we brought home from the hospital anymore. Another scream, this time out of direct eyesight. Kirishima stood quickly and raced to see what was wrong. Ochako came up behind her husband and hugged him from behind. How's it going? She asked. The boys are fine, Katsuki replied. He's just being an old mother hen. Both boys came tearing round the corner, giggling like maniacs, with Kirishima in hot pursuit. See? Fine. Ochako chuckled and sat down next to her husband. If he's this worried about his son, I hope he never has a daughter. The poor girl won't be able to get within 2 meters of a boy. Katsuki barked a laugh and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her to him. I knew there was a reason I loved you. Gee, thanks. I'm only the mother of your child, she teased. Katsuki placed a kiss on her head. So we good? Mm-hmm. The doc says everything looks fine. We can start trying right away. Another baby. Katsuki had all sorts of emotions running through him. Excitement, fear, happiness, apprehension. Everything had worked out fine the last time, though. You sure you want to do this again? He asked. You were pretty miserable last time you were pregnant. Yeah, but it was worth it in the end, don't you think? She smiled at her husband. He returned the smile. Yeah. They shared a kiss. Ochako sighed happily and nuzzled deeper into Katsuki's grasp. Besides, there was one thing we didn't do last time that I want to try. May said it was mind-blowing. Katsuki's quirked an eyebrow. Oh? What? Ochako grinned sultrily, leaned up, and put her mouth next to his ear. Put a baby in me, she whispered. Katsuki shuddered. Space Cadet, don't do that when we're in public. Wait till we get Yasuhiro down for the night. Ochako's grin widened into a smile. Oh, I plan to. The end. This has been Ugravidity by Dr. Emmit Brown, read to you by the author. Thank you, Rose and Ms. Lemonade, for letting me invade your channel for a bit to read my story to your audience. If you're interested in listening to more of my works, you can find my channel under the title Doc Reads Fanfic on Spotify, Anchor, or on YouTube. If you're listening to this on one of my channels, please like and subscribe. I'll be reading more of my fics on here, along with some fics by some of my friends. I want to thank Amy C. Loki for beta reading this fic, brainstorming, and catching the worst of my errors. I also want to thank her for being a dear friend throughout this whole pandemic. See you next time. Goodbye.